just saying we'll get started in a minute. I was just giving people a chance to show up in case they were still coming in. Yeah, just maybe a minute or two after, just to give people a second, not to keep jokes, but. Good evening. Thank you all for coming. We will take a quick minute to introduce ourselves before we start on the presentation. And since I'm the one talking, I will start. I am Laura Fott. I am a senior associate and the sustainability strategist for Feingold Alexander Architects.
It's great to have you all here. Thank you very much for taking your time out this evening and nice night. My name is Tony Shaw. I'm a principal and Director of Design at Feingold Alexander Architects.
Great, and I'm Megan Hoover, also an architect at Feingold Alexander Architect, and excited to show you what we've prepared today.
Well, thank you again. We know that this is an exciting time, and everyone has had probably a lot of experiences with this beautiful building, and the building has had a lot of life and a lot of change over time. So we have started on this process, and I know this is probably a little small, so I'll just touch on these points, but we've interviewed all of the staff, all of the various departments of the City Hall, and this is what we've heard from them. So in this process, we go through what we call a feasibility study. So it's understanding the building, we do existing conditions, we do a lot of research and background both on what the deficiencies of the building are, knowing that the electrical may be old or the HVAC is not adequate. So we go through those, and we also talk with the staff about what their needs are. You know, we know that the building folks have grown into this space, and it may not meet their needs, or it may overly meet their needs. They may have more generous space than they need just because that was the space available. So we have to understand all of those aspects. And this is what we heard from the folks that we interviewed. We heard that the building is historic and they want to honor it. We all want to honor the history of Beverly. Beverly is an amazing city and it has an amazing wealth of history, and this building reflects that. But it has to be a new, transformed, modern space. We need to be able to make sure that folks can hear when we're presenting. We want to make sure that we can have these hybrid situations and present to the public so it's both accessible and usable for the staff, but also all the residents of Beverly. We want to make sure that it is a universally welcoming and accessible building, by which we mean it has to be usable for the staff and for those of the public who are coming to the space and being able to interact with the different departments that they need to. They need to be, everyone needs to feel welcome to come through the space. But the staff itself also needs to feel safe within that space. Public buildings bring a level of security that needs to be addressed. The same thing is true for buildings or rooms that are being used in the evenings, off hours. We need to be able to provide security and safety for those of you who are using the building in the evenings. Sustainability is also a huge goal. We know it's a city goal. You have an amazing climate action plan, and we want to make sure that any building project we do moving forward takes into account the energy use of the city, this building, and what it means for the growth of the city going forward. So we also want to make sure, as I mentioned, that all the departments and staff adjacencies are taken into account. Right now, as I said, we've grown into this space and it may not have the adjacencies needed. You may have to go from the first floor to the third floor or back and forth to do the, to interact with the groups that you need. And the same thing is true for the staff. So we want to make sure that we make it so it is flexible for the future and that those groups can grow into that, but also directly usable for them now. And as I mentioned, making sure the technology and hybrid, as we're doing tonight, we want to make sure that we can have in-person and public meeting, but also being able to broadcast that out to folks who aren't able to be here. And so the meeting spaces need to be flexible for that 21st century uses that we're all at. So this is a very complicated diagram, but it's how we go through what those departments for the building are. And so Megan, do you want to walk us through just quickly?
Yeah, so I'll step closer to the mic. So like Laura was saying, this is a bit of a complicated diagram. It really outlines our weeks-long effort of quantifying space needs for each of the departments in the building. So you can see sort of that block with the grayish outline, that's what there is existing space in the building. And then the dashed outline is what we're proposing, how much space we've quantified by talking to each of the department heads, determining who doesn't have an office that needs an office and vice versa, who needs more storage, things like that. And so after interviewing each of the department, going through this quantification exercise, we found that between the existing City Hall building that we're in right now and the former police station that's attached to this building, between those two buildings, we're just over 35,000 gross square feet. And from our calculations, we've quantified that we're really looking at something that's closer to 42,000 gross square feet. So the new design is gonna look a little bit bigger than what we have right now.
But that also takes into account two departments which are not currently housed in the City Hall. So we are looking at bringing health services and the inspectional services who are housed in other locations back into a central location. So that's part of the analysis that's being driven, that's driving that number. And I will say everything we're presenting, these are studies. Nothing is set in stone. We are just looking at what it means for the building and the space. And so we've walked through, taking this knowledge and walking through how do we fit that back in the building. So you're gonna see these colors travel through the diagrams a few times. And I, again, know this is small, but we're gonna go through this in the different options because we want you to understand the levels of design that we go through to understand the buildings in the space. So starting all the way on the left, that is in the upper corner, is a diagram of the existing building. So the building we're sitting in now is the rectangle in the front, and then the existing police station, former police station, is the building in the back. And then directly below that is a plan of those two spaces again. And you can see the numbers that Megan had mentioned, the number of gross square footage for those two buildings, and then parking spaces, because we know parking is always an issue, and we have a defined footprint that we're dealing with. So the way we looked at this is in kind of option 1, option 2, and option 3, and those are the big buckets of design. So the first option for option 1 is that we looked at keeping this exact building that we're in, the Cabot House, the historic City Hall, and then looking at keeping the existing police station. Now, that existing police station didn't, as Megan mentioned, doesn't get us up to count, taking account all of the square footage we need for all of those departments. So that kind of ochre color, is that what we landed on?
I think that's where we landed.
The kind of brownish color on top is saying if we built up on top of the police station, so keeping both existing buildings and building another story on top of that, that will get us up to the square footage and take into account all of those departments. So you can see we then break down into the square footages again, what it means for the parking, and we go into some pros and cons. Now I'm not going to dig into those just yet because we're going to go into each one, but I want you to understand Option 1 is keeping existing police station, keeping both buildings, adding on to it. Option 2, you're gonna see there's option 2A and 2B. That's because we've had a number of iterations. We're trying to narrow it down. We'll go into what 2A and B are, but 2 means taking down the police station itself down to its foundation. And the reason for that is all the floor levels in the police station are different than they are in this building, which means that we end up with lots of ramps, another elevator, a lot more work for accessibility. And that building is a masonry wall with no insulation, which means we'd build in and it becomes a little bit harder, and there's just numbers of items that add on top to make that a usable space. So we've taken it down to the foundation, still reusing that foundation because we're still very concerned about reuse and embodied carbon and knowing that that foundation is a usable entity. So building up from that, building on it, and leveling it out so that we have each of the floor levels aligned with this building and about in the same space. So that's our option 2, keeping the existing foundation of the police station but new up from the police station and keeping this building. Option 3, this is our blue sky thinking and seeing what it means, because we have to explore all the options of taking down the police station in whole. Once again, retaining this existing historic building because of the beautiful historic character, but taking down the police station and the police station foundation. So freeing ourselves up from that footprint that's there, and then what would that mean? So also keeping within the existing zoning and setbacks. So we would move it in away from the cemetery, from the side setbacks. So just taking into account modern requirements for that building. So now we'll walk through each of those options a little more in depth, but those are the overview, just to give you a taste for it.
All right. So just to make sure that you're all paying attention, some of you might have noticed that option 1A was actually not on that matrix, and we'll tell you why. This is the option where we looked at just renovating the police station and City Hall, and like we were saying before, there's just not enough space. So this means that, like Laura mentioned, we are in our new design bringing in 2 additional departments into the building, the health department and municipal inspections. So in this scheme, that means that we're not able to fit those off-site departments into this new design. It also means that all of the long-term file storage that's currently stored throughout the building, we can't fit that either. So that would also have to be stored off-site. That inaccessibility is going to prove to be pretty problematic with the functionality of the new City Hall. That also means that there would be 1 or 2 departments that would be functioning in the basement of this building. I'm not sure if many of you have been to the basement of this building before, but I can tell you it's not the greatest place to work. So for all of these reasons, we decided to rule this option out and move on and see what we can do if we start to expand. So that brings us to option 1B, where, like Laura mentioned, we're adding a level to the existing police station. That means that now we're pretty much hitting the square footage we need to fit everybody above grade. So nobody's in the basement. We can fit all file storage, so that's really great too. Also, there are some benefits of retaining the building footprint from an embodied carbon and sustainability standpoint. It's usually better to reuse what we have existing rather than build new. Also in this scheme, and we'll walk through the layout of it, we'll get into the building and look at how things are being laid out, but we're reusing the historic entry and that main staircase at the front of the building in this scheme as well. So that's a pretty desirable aspect of this building that we're trying to maintain. However, that does bring up a bit of an accessibility issue. We've heard through interviews that the distance of the main entrance from the parking lot might be a little bit of an issue accessibility-wise. Then also speaking of accessibility, Laura also mentioned the change in floor levels between the police station and this building. So you'll see we've had to add an elevator, an extra set of stairs just to get us up to that same level. So that takes up square footage as we start to look at how to implement that level change. We will have to look at meeting the new energy code by insulating the existing police station and this building as well. That might prove to be a challenge, especially in the police station. Also, just the idea of adding a level to the police station does bring some significant structural implications. We haven't gotten much further than the feasibility stage. We know that there will be structural implications, but how much that is, we're gonna have to dive into a little bit more, but it might prove to be a bit cost prohibitive as opposed to building new. So just something to keep in mind as we're moving through this scheme. So we did look at how the departments would be laid out in this scheme. And so just to get us a bit oriented here, I just want to caveat these diagrams with the colored bubbles you see. Those all signify departments. For example, the finance department's in green, the city clerk is in this purple color, the mayor's office is in purple. So this is meant to signify the areas that the departments take up within the building. So to orient ourselves, this rectangle here to the left, that's this city hall building we're in now. Then this is the police station up in the upper right here. And then the main entrance in this scheme off Cabot Street is the historic entrance over here. So like I said, we would do our best to improve accessibility by improving the walkway and the ramp system up to the main entrance. And you would come into this entry lobby here. And rather than coming into the central corridor layout that's currently in City Hall with the separate transaction windows for each department, we're looking at a scenario where we have more of a shared public counter. So the public could come into this lobby, come up to the counter, and then somebody from a respective department would come up to meet you. So it's an attempt to improve wayfinding and accessibility. And it also allows us to really maximize the benefits of the department adjacencies. Now, instead of being split up by a hallway, they're all next to each other behind this public counter. So that's an attempt to improve workflow and communication within the departments. And then the departments that need less access to the public counter would be stationed further away and in the police station as well. And that goes for the second floor. Up here we have the health department and inspections, which have now been brought into the building. We have planning and engineering on this level as well. And then city council chambers would be on the third level, like it is now. The mayor's office would be up here, the solicitor, and then IT would be up here as well in that level that's built on top of the existing police station. So you might notice that if you're familiar with the layout of City Hall, the departments themselves, they're pretty similar to the levels that they're on now. For example, finance department still on the first floor, city clerk still on the first floor, city council chamber still on the third floor. It's just the way that you interact with each department would change quite a bit. So with that, we'll move on to option 2.
So as we said, first, option 1's keeping police station, building up from the police station. Option 2's taking the police station, former police station I should say, down to its foundation. So as we mentioned, that retains the foundation, allows us to build up from there. Options 2A and 2B are very similar in their program layouts by floor, similar to, as Megan was noting, in option 1, but there's just a little bit different in how we have the corridor. So we'll get into the plans again on that, but we maintain the foundation. We have same floor level between both buildings, between the new built up on the former police station and this station, so we have full accessibility. The main entrance is going to be moved to the, in this scenario, is being suggested to move to the near the parking. And we still retain the historic entrance as a secondary entrance, but the main entrance, allows that accessibility. And then it allows us to improve the adjacencies by, reworking the reworking the layouts. So this is the basement plan, which we're not going to really dig in too much, other than to say no one's in the basement again in this scenario. We would have our mechanical systems, our long-term storage, and our utilities. So then moving up to the first floor, so the main floor where you entered. As I noted, So the parking, Cabot Street is running along the left side of the page, and both options, we have, option A on the upper portion of the plan, option B on the lower portion. So the main entrance is right here off of the parking lot in both options. So you enter directly from that, allowing a more direct entry, creating a little entry lobby on both floors, on both options, and similar distribution of staff on this floor as with option 1, so the city clerk, the assessor, retirement board. But the difference, as you're probably noting, is the corridor. So the corridor in option A runs along the exterior wall and keeps the majority of the staff space behind that. So you have one long corridor and all of the spaces are behind it. You still have a public counter that runs along in the blue, and we have photos of two of the examples of how that looks. Both would have light, allowing to travel through. On option 2, it's the center loaded. We call it a double loaded corridor because there's space on either side of the corridor. It's very similar to what you have now, so you're probably very familiar with it. So that divides the space up a little bit more, and everyone walks down the center, and you have counter space on either side, but still entering main entrance off of the parking area for those that need it, or the historic entry still being retained. So then it's going to get a little repetitive as it goes up through the floors. Single loaded corridor along the option A, along the front south face, and then the double loaded for option B. And then the photos really are just, again, examples of projects that have some of these attributes. So the clerk's office transaction desk would be similar to how it look on either option. And then, it's creating a small gathering spaces, because we know as these meetings tend to exit, folks are gathering outside of people's offices, which can be a little disturbing. So trying to create some public space. And then moving to the third floor, again, similar distribution, mayor's office and suites, and then the council chambers. So here we wanted to note that, since we're in the city council chamber, it makes it very easy to point out that the city council chamber is shown, existing city council chamber is shown in this dashed line on option A, and we're really keeping the city council chamber in about the same space, but shifting it over so that we have a corridor that is outside of the space to be able to go through, so that when people need to transition or walk from one space to the side of the building to the other, they don't have to interrupt a meeting. We should also note here that while we really appreciate the beauty of this room, there are some accessibility challenges. These raised edges are hard for folks. It's a little uncomfortable to sit in a chair next to an edge, and I'm sure that the council folks are always worried if they're sitting next to one. So we would still could have a raised area, but we would want to rework this. Also, as many of you have probably noticed, you're straining to look at a display on the side as opposed to being in front. So we could improve how the layout of the space works. Also, as we mentioned, we will be meeting the new energy stretch code for all work of this level in Massachusetts. So, which means we would need to insulate this building more at a higher level than it is now, which means we need to bring the walls in to add insulation to it. So we would have to rework some of the exterior fabric of the building, not to the outside, but to the inside. So we would be losing some of this character, but we can save it and reuse it as to hold on to some of the feel of the space. And then if you look at the bottom where we're doing the center loaded, double loaded corridor, we've moved the city council chamber into what is now the former police station space. Even though there's no third story there, it'd be a new building. But that allows us to not have that corridor travel through, because as you'd imagine, the corridor would continue through and divide the city council into. Parking is always an issue, and we know that as we move through this design, we are constrained. We only have so much footprint. So one of the items that we've been asked to look at is what does it mean for parking for any of these designs? Now, the parking itself is a little constrained as it is. It's a little tight for modern standards, so we would be we'd be losing a few spaces with that. So we looked at what other options could be about, with that parking. Now, that isn't to say that those are our only options. We just wanted to look at what the numbers are so that we can understand it as we move forward.
We should point out that parking, we know, is a big deal. It's always never enough. And we know that there's a lot of other considerations. One of the things about these scenarios is that in one of those diagrams, it assumed taking part of the park. So this is a major debate issue because for a net gain of 5 to 7 spaces, you're losing 30% or 40% of the park. And that's a really significant issue. So we know that these are some of the challenges that are in front of us in any of these schemes, but we just want to make folks aware, whatever we decide on, there are going to be trade-offs, and no matter which one we go in. So the third one is what happens if we not only remove the police building, but we start fresh, something completely different. And what could that be? So the big thing here is that again, the same block of orange, this represents a footprint or diagram to just an entirely new building attached to the back and side of the existing city hall. And there's a couple of things that we believe is accomplishing. One, we not only can create fully accessible entrance, but right off the parking lot, we're creating direct access at grade. The previous 2A, 2B, we still had external steps, external ramps, like you do in the front. This eliminates that because it internalizes stairs and ramps inside the building as opposed to outside. Number two, this therefore emphasizes the new entry in some ways more prominently coming off the parking lot because we're able to recreate and we're not beholden to the design and footprint of the existing police building because we don't have to sort of be constrained by what the police building footprint is. It frees us up. Another big change you're going to see is this scheme is going to study the option of relocating the city council chamber down to the first floor. And in doing so, you're going to see some ramifications that fall from that idea because it achieves a different way that folks such as yourselves and the public engaged can come into this chamber without necessarily having to come up to this third level to get to it. And then we do also believe that in a new design, we can create greater efficiency because we're not restricted by the footprint of the police building. We can design the new addition to be more compact, more efficient. In some ways, that leads to some other positives. So those are the things that I think accrue from looking at a new. We still have challenges with parking in the scheme, and we still have some issues no matter what in any of the schemes vis-a-vis circulation. But let's take a look at this. So won't belabor this, the ground floor, basement level is the same thing that Laura just described, indicates support, storage, mechanical, utilities, all the things that go towards the existing and new. And so here's the bigger change. So on the first level, public entrance comes off the parking lot at grade. So there is no ramps and steps when you come right into it. And there is a sort of generous lobby that's shown here when you come into this location and is lined with the circulation again along the south side facing the park. Public moves this way to this way from both the new entrance and back to the store. And the way we solve the level change here is right here we introduce a wide sweep of steps and an elevator that creates direct connection between this and this level. And you can see here the city council chamber in this bubble diagram is shown right here. Right off the front new lobby at ground level, directly accessible by the public, and it allows one to kind of come to this space without having to go through the rest of the building. So again, for off hours, you don't have to kind of go through to get up. Now these images, these are just, again, these are ideas. And one of the things about the nature of a public realm for a city hall is that we could also think about this more than just you're coming in and it's circulation. You could actually do things that maybe celebrates the town. It could be something that engages activities. It could be other meeting spaces. You could have historical displays. This one happens to be a very large city hall. This is a bowling center in Dudley, but the principle is the same. It's a public realm outside of the circulation. And this lower sketch, again, I apologize for the size of it, but this sketch is if you're standing right here looking this way to the left. And here you can see that the idea of the new lobby opens up This corridor is here along the southern edge, facing out to the park. Here you see that there's another staircase that opens up right here, connecting from the first to second level, begins to create a bigger transparency. So this is probably the most significant change in this scheme that results. The interdepartmental issues are still the same. The high traffic area, collectors, city clerks, assessors, all of that are shown here. These are all fungible. When you go to the second and third levels, the same idea, but here you can see on the second level, for example, we have the mayor's office, in this case, directly above the city council chamber. So while not on the same level, they have easy access to get to that level. And then we have planning, purchasing, auditors, and then on the top level, we have inspection, health, engineering, and so on and so forth. But that's really the biggest change that results from a new proposal. And then these are just a last series of very quick sketches, not intended to be designed, but to illustrate a couple of things. So on the left, this is a view along Cabot Street, as you know well, the park here, the historic entrance here. But you see right here, this is where the new addition begins to become visible. And it begins to create a whole sort of circulation path. And then from the parking lot side here, we can create this idea of somehow creating something welcoming, open, and allows the public to come in into a new entrance leading into the city hall proper. So this is probably the most significant differential between 3, 2, and 1. And here again, you can see the implications. Parking is still a challenge. No matter what we do lose perhaps a few more spaces because when we move this new addition forward to align with the edge here, of course that impacts parking. And again, you can see here, to gain 5 spaces, we have to take up a pretty good chunk of the public park to do this. And we've had a lot of discussion about parking. It's a whole topic in of itself, but this kind of brackets the sort of big picture about all these different ideas.
So then we come back to the summary, now that you've had an expansive on each of the 1, 2, and 3, and this, you'll be, remember this slide from previous, just allows us to touch on those pros and cons, touch on those 3 ideas, and really open it up for questions or comments if anyone has any.
I guess we're asked to have people either speak to
There's the
portable mic or there's a mic on the stand behind you if anyone wants to start.
I don't even need to get up, you can hear me, so.
it's for the camera. Sorry.
Thank you. My bad.
No, thank you.
David Mahood, 191 Lothrop. Just curious about energy efficiency. Laura, you're the sustainability strategist you mentioned. Are you pursuing a green building certification, LEED, BREEAM, WELL, any of those? So that would be looking at all these, are one in particular going to give you a better option of being more energy efficient and the other elements of sustainability?
So we haven't, landed on any certification. We really, once we start to look at, narrow down which option we're moving forward with, we can talk about what that means for the different sustainability certificates, because they all have different goals. Passive House has one, LEED has another, living building or net zero. There's numbers, and each option is going to have something that's going to be stronger than the other. Now, I will say that we have looked at geothermal under the parking lot, which is one of the reasons why the parking would change, is we would pull that up and be able to put geothermal wells below that. In any scenario, we are all very fortunate to live in an amazing state that has passed an amazing new energy code. So the building will be very energy efficient just by nature of being a Massachusetts building, but we can help that along. We do a lot of really great buildings that can make that for the future, the operational energy, the energy it's using as it goes forward, can lower that to make sure that it will function well and without a lot of maintenance, but on low energy. But the other side of operational energy is embodied energy, so that's the amount of energy that's in the building at stands. We've done an analysis of what it means to take down the police station, which is one of the reasons why we looked at keeping the foundation, because I think that's a really good middle ground, because insulating that wall type is going to be a difficult one. There's yeah, I won't bore everyone with building science. I'm happy to do it. I'm the person you don't want to stand next to at a cocktail party because I'll talk about wall sections all night.
And she does.
Yep, yeah, sorry. But, insulating an existing masonry wall, you move the dew point. You can only add so much insulation before you start to deteriorate the wall. So that's why insulating an existing masonry wall is hard. It's doable, and we will do it, and we do that analysis. But given the police station isn't a historic, doesn't have the character, it might not make sense to go that way with that, and we can get a really efficient, great space. And concrete saving a foundation has some positives because concrete is the biggest embodied carbon of a lot of our building materials. So that's to me a trade-off for sustainability.
Well, good luck.
Of course.
Kim, where should I go to speak?
Here.
Kim, where should I go to speak? Okay. Thanks. I want to welcome everybody. Thanks for showing up tonight. I was next door with several of the city councilors in a subcommittee meeting. Wanted to greet you when the meeting started, but our meeting ran late. I just want to say to David's question, everything we do in this city, we're trying to drive down our greenhouse gas emissions. When we hired this architectural team, one of their directives was that we want to build a net zero building. That's a goal, recognizing that we're trying to, part of this project is to renovate a historic building, right? But Laura's spot on with, we all understand embodied carbon. It's not something that's in the mainstream of new building projects, and it's very costly. But the idea that we could reuse the foundation of the old police station is a real plus. But I don't know where we'll land, but we absolutely are looking to make this a net zero building. And Laura also mentioned geothermal. We are going to be doing, I don't think we've done it yet, but monitoring of the soils to determine just, what it looks like. We built geothermal with the new police station, and we're building it into the new HVAC system at the library. And just for anybody who wasn't sure what that is, we dig 500 feet underground with pipes, and you run water down and up, and the stable year-round temperature of the ground when you get down below the surface of roughly 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit is used to cool that water in the summer and heat that water in the winter. And that water running through the building system inside the building helps to either raise or lower the temperature, helps to heat it or cool it. So it's a great way to take us to use the earth, and then that system is all electrically run, so no gas, no oil on site, and we're pushing, as you know, with trying to host solar where we can, trying to green the power grid that we use locally and regionally. So it's all steps, right? And I'll stop there but I do want to ask, as you folks are sharing your thoughts, we've done this with our city staff. We've done it. We're doing it with you. We're going to be going to a city council meeting with this conversation. Really curious about how people feel about the current double-loaded corridor versus a corridor on one side. Curious how you're looking at parking and the importance of the pocket park next door to City Hall, and those kind of trade-offs and things that are on the table. Thanks. Thanks, Tony.
I'm Cynthia Michaels, homeowner at 108 Lothrop Street. I was wondering if there were any scenario whereby there had been a consideration of double decking the parking.
So we didn't look at going up with parking because we have it would shadow that building, and we hadn't heard that there was a need for doubling the amount of parking. But we did look at going below the building for parking as a scenario that we often end up doing in city-constrained locations. It actually reduces the amount of parking we can get on the site because you end up needing more travel lanes. And I have a feeling the same thing would be for going up, because if you think you now end up with a ramp and you end up with more circular, it is something that we can consider. And as we go forward with conversations about parking, we would need to look at it.
There are significant cost implications for double-deck parking in any scenario.
Just to that point, we've looked at this in several tight lots around the downtown, trying to find parking over the years. You lose for the foundations that support a deck, and as Lara talked about for the circulation, you lose a good amount of the surface parking to put a deck above. And this is a really tight space, and so you look at the cost per space that you can actually, and what you can gain as a net additional number of spaces. I don't think there's much opportunity with the tightness of the lot on that point. Just, I mean, great that you brought it up. It's the kind of thinking that we have to do. Just don't know that it's not a wide open space that we could do a lot with.
Hi, Robin Luna Whitman, 12 Lothrop Street. I first of all want to just, applaud you for being so comprehensive and thoughtful at the different options. And I personally am drawn very much to option 3. I know from experience, everyone thinks, oh, renovation is much cheaper. Building like that police station, it's going to end up costing more. But the things I like about option 3 is I love the idea of the council chamber being down on the first level. I think it would then welcome and be a more inviting place. I mean, right now, City Hall, it's a beautiful building, but it's not very inviting from the outside. And I love the idea of the single loaded corridor with the glazing wherever, the new building is. Because again, I think it would enliven from the sidewalk, the streetscape, as opposed to being something that's kind of, not very inviting. The thing about the double-loaded corridor, where you have the corridor down the middle and offices to the side, you can see being up here that even if the wall came to that first column so that the corridor were along that outside facade, there's still plenty of natural light that can come in. It's not a very big footprint, so I really think that that's a nice way to go. One thing I do want to mention, because I'm also on the Downtown Beverly 2030 group, is, there was discussion about public toilets, and that nowhere in downtown is there a place. I mean, it's hard to find today, where if someone is walking downtown, where they might be able to find facilities. So, an opportunity of having consideration for that right off the entry, I think would be a nice resource for the downtown area. But nice, I like these options. Thank you very much.
I feel like you're a plant, because when we had this conversation with the staff, we used, because we're in the footprint of the building, it's very easy to say that the corridor would align about there, and you can see the amount of space that you would end up with and how far you would be from the light. It really isn't very wide. It's not the widest of building footprints. I think that's a great consideration to hear about public facilities being accessible after hours. Is not a comment that I have heard yet. But that is one of the thoughts for moving the council chambers to the first floor, is that because it is after hours, that you could be closed off. You can close off the rest of the building if there were late night activities, and also having maybe the restrooms be in that area that could be still lockable, closing down the rest of the building.
Just a couple of questions for you. I'm John Taylor from 41 Cole Street. I just had a question for you on the aisle thing. Maybe you thought about this, maybe you haven't. I wonder about accessibility, if like somebody's having trouble walking or something, would, the middle or one side or the other side be better or not? I don't know. You would know. Then I wanted to know if you have talked to anybody at Historic Beverly. This building is very old. I don't know if there's anything historic about the council chambers, but obviously if you were to remove them, and whatever, to the building, is there anything worth preserving? One of the things we had done in the city, you remember Elliott Chambers, when they destroyed that building, which was a good thing to do, we don't need to remember that event. What they did is they just took and they did a memorial in front of the CVS to remember an event. But they took some items, so you could take some historic items and do that. I don't know if you talked to anybody from Historic Beverly, so I'll leave that. And then I wanted to know, and maybe the mayor would know this more than you would, when are we going to remove the police label from there? because I worry, to be quite blunt, that somebody is going to be walking down on a late night, some poor woman, and see police, oh good, and then it's not the police.
So I can answer the first two, and then I'll leave you with the third. But we would be meeting ADA, MAB, Massachusetts Accessible Board criteria for any space. It would be a fully accessible. To the feel or use of one side versus two sides for someone who maybe have other needs, it could go either way. I've heard that having double loaded makes for it a bit difficult to walk through if people are on both sides, but maybe it would make it also so that things are a little more compact. So there are plays for both, but it would be fully accessible. All counters, we would always have accessible height counters and for wheelchair accessibility, and all restrooms, public and staff.
One attribute about the single loaded on one side of the public, of course, is when you bring natural light here, right now you don't have it because you're obviously in the middle. So actually from the public realm, in some ways it's desirable because you actually have the ability to get to light and to views. So from an orientation standpoint, it probably actually enhances the ability for the public to use it. But the other question related to the naming of the police for the mayor.
Second one. Nope. Sorry, you jumped over the second one. The second question about Mass Historic. So we have not, we would like to determine which direction we're going, because in any scenario we will be saving parts of the building and retaining parts of the building. It is not a landmark building, it is a landmark district. We are very sensitive to historic. We all do preservation and historic work. This space is not even from the 30s renovation. This space was renovated later. But it has character, whether or not it is aged of 100 or 80 years. It has feel and personality to many residents, and so if that is something that the town or the city feels strongly about, we would obviously take character. And as we noted, that is something we heard. The historic feel of the building is important to people, so we would not make this a blank box, and we would respect the historic character. But the police naming, I don't know if Mayor, if you want to speak to the name of the police station.
John, thanks for the heads up.
Yeah. I'm worried.
I come in and out of the building every day and I haven't noticed. No, honestly. So I'm sure we can take it down.
Thanks. All right.
My name is Caroline Mason. We have so little green space in downtown Beverly that I would hate to see sacrifice that park for 4 parking spaces. We just have to stop giving parking the top priority on everything, especially this building and this location. So I hope you think long and hard about not taking away park for parking. Thanks.
One of the issues related to parking, thank you very much for that comment. When we're bringing more departments here, actually there is increased the number of fleet vehicles that are going to be coming here. So it kind of works a little bit against us because more people are going to be here from the staff side. But there are revisions for creating, EV charging stations. And we certainly don't want to dissuade those. And for public parking and handicap parking, that's also probably an important consideration. There's going to be a lot of trade-offs in all of this discussion between how many spaces and who gets the spaces. And this is something which is a larger discussion beyond our immediate, just City Hall.
Hi, my name's Wendy Pearl. I'm at 21 Morningside Drive. I also want to thank you for the ability to comment at an early stage in the design and to have so much information available to us to make thoughtful comments. It's really well presented. I would love to have the slides available either online or in some other way because the text was hard to see on some of the diagrams. I too am gravitating towards option 3 because of the efficiency of that layout and the ability to get the city council chamber down to the first floor. there does seem to be an opportunity to create those informal public interactions with our elected officials and other staff, and just really be a community. But at the same time, it also turns the back of the building, or turns the front of the building onto a side street, and it turns its back on Cabot Street. So I think we need to resolve how the building still is part of downtown. Retaining the green space is a big part of that. I would suggest that the city look at not just the building footprint, but the entire lot, and how to program that lot, including the alley. I think the alley is a real opportunity, and I think we're gonna need some public access from the alley to the building, and I think that alley could be a really cool space. I mean, pocket, landscape design, fountains, art. New York City does a great job converting alleyways into really interesting public spaces. So I don't know if a landscape architect will be engaged at some point. I think the parking lot, and the alleyway should all be considered part of the public realm. And I hope that parking is not the priority. We just spent a lot of money buying a parking lot, so remote parking should be considered for staff if the priority is to have visitor parking available at the front door. So thank you.
I think we should say too that option 3 with the addition in the back and the moving the city council chambers, we sometimes joke that some of these design options are a la carte, that is not specific to option 3. That could happen too with keeping the foundation and moving things around a bit. So there are portions that work for different. We're just trying to illustrate a number of different design pieces.
Good evening. My name is Wes Slate, 26 Lothrop Street. I was the Ward 2 City Councilor for 6 years and was Council Vice President in my last term. I was also the City Clerk for 6 years until my retirement in 2020, and I'm currently an elected member of the Beverly Retirement Board, although I speak tonight as a private citizen and not as a member of that board. Having served and worked in this building for 12 years and having had many meetings and interactions with city employees here, since we purchased our home on Lothrop Street in 1982, I think I can speak with some understanding of the needs for this building during renovations and the expectations those who work, serve, and have business here have. I believe there are 3 priorities that should be considered in your designs, and I understand that you have these options up here, but there are a couple of things that you may want to also consider, and there are 3. The first one is creative and full use of the existing footprint, including the current City Hall building, the former police station annex, which I won't call it that anymore, John. The area between the annex and Cabot Street, the parking lot and the grassy area, the parklet, between the parking lot and Cabot Street. The second is removal of all vital records, historic documents, and other files, materials, and equipment from the basement to more suitable storage. And the third is the reestablishment of the former 4th floor of this building. Just brief detail on each of those. On the first one, since the last major renovation of this building by the WPA in the 30s, the growth of city government, the requirements for records retention by the Commonwealth, and the expectations of citizens and businesses who interact with the city, the physical limitations of the current layout have been apparent to all for some time. As you indicated, and you've included in this, chief among these, municipal inspections in the health department have been relocated off-site, along with a number of smaller operations like Veterans Services, the Sealer of Weights and Measures, and most recently, the Retirement Board. The move of the police department to their new facility has freed up their former station. So it is that I believe that any plan to renovate this building take into account full use of the site, including those other areas I mentioned earlier. Parking, of course, must be provided for visitors, and I agree with the comments about not sacrificing anything for parking that's not required. Secondly, on the basement, anyone who has been in the basement of the building can attest that it is a rabbit warren of nooks and crannies, at least 2 vaults, the IT operation, storage of vital records and financial documents that must be kept permanently. There is also a small employee break area. No one can claim that this is an ideal or even acceptable area for such storage, particularly given the overhead presence of various wires and cables, water and sewer lines, and that the basement is at least at and perhaps below sea level. For the convenience of employees and constituents, some of those records must be kept on site. However, others could be stored elsewhere. In any case, some provision for a large, secure, climate-controlled storage area must be included in your planning for the renovations, wherever that is. And finally, early pictures of this building show its original 4 stories. My understanding is that the 4th floor was a large open space used for various public meetings and other events. The annual Fireman's Ball, I am told, was held there. However, as it was not properly maintained, when the WPA renovations were undertaken, the 4th floor was removed. It seems that if the building were originally built It seems that if the building were originally built with 4 stories, it could still be able to support 4. I'll state, I'm not an engineer, but it's a possibility, as this would greatly increase the total square footage available. I appreciate your efforts on this major renovation of our flagship municipal building. Considering what other communities have been able to accomplish with similar efforts to their sites of city or town government, I would expect no less for our ability to do as well, and even better with our own city hall. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those are really helpful comments and all very good points. I will say we as a team are all looking at the site as a whole, and given the constraints we have and historic nature of the building, we've landed where we are. But that isn't to say that there aren't other options which we should and need to explore more. To the record storage, we are very aware of the basement, having spent time down there, and we are very aware of the records in the building and what needs to happen going forward. In all scenarios, we are looking at the foundation of the former police station, now annex, as it is a very dry, watertight, and we've looked at the climate records and flood maps, and have determined that that is a great place for climate controlled, very controlled storage. We would not be putting any break areas or any of the such in the basement. It's just not adequate height. It's not. It just doesn't meet standards.
I can speak to the 4th floor. Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing up the 4th floor. It's kind of been a pleasure of ours to dig into the history of this building. It's got a very rich history, and we were surprised to find that there was a 4th floor at one point, and it was interesting to see that over time it was removed and replaced with a flat roof. From what we've looked into, it seems that through zoning we are limited to 3 stories. That's not to say it's not something that we can look into, but that's our thought process has restricted us from looking into adding that 4th story because of that zoning restriction.
Also, it wasn't original. It was added and then taken back off. We have the drawings of the addition of adding the mansard on of the section. It's amazing. It's in 3 colors. Very rare do we get historic drawings that have multiple colors. It's beautiful. And the space, there was a mezzanine level above the 3rd floor for looking down over. But unfortunately, I don't believe from the drawings we have and the dates on it for adding that story that it was original.
The other thing, that would, and thank you for raising that, like Laura mentioned about trying to add a floor on the police building. So if we were to even explore doing it on this building, with current code requirements and structural upgrades and seismic, it would probably be much more onerous than when it was done originally, because we would have to upgrade everything here to accommodate that kind of structural addition. But we were actually intrigued with this idea from the get-go as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we are looking at, part of all assessments for existing buildings is understanding the lateral loading and what the structural upgrades would be. And so that is part of looking at this, and that's without adding another story. So adding a story back would trigger lateral and and seismic and a few other structural concerns that would be more invasive to this building. But again, doesn't preclude us from it. It just means it's more, adds more cost and more effort.
Alfred Rossi, 16 Atlantic Avenue. Recently moved to Beverly, but grew up here, so I know the city. The point of comfort station or facilities, as a child, I used the facilities that were in the basement and have been since closed off. They were welcomed at that point. The other thing I would like to say is that I don't believe you really should take any grass away from that park for cars. I agree with previous statements. If you really need more space, it makes more sense to go to third option and go up a fourth story on the police station, because then you can build from the bottom up, and you don't have to worry about the structural walls here. The other thing I was noticing, that you don't have a basement in that new third option.
No, actually, we do.
But you
We do.
didn't show that, okay. But that would be your I see the crosshatch
The
underneath it.
crosshatch is that's the basement where it says department storage. That's the basement under the new.
It's not easy to see.
Yeah,
But
understood.
that makes sense for your storage, vault storage. My only concern with the side corridor is that people, the citizens of Beverly and anybody doing business is in the city hall for 1 hour and they're gone. The people who work here are here 8 hours minimum all day. And if you're going to take light away from them, I'm not sure it's the best thing, but that's just a comment.
No, understood, and it's absolutely, all those are very valid comments, and we agree. No one ever wants to take away green space for space. We're, as we said, we're exploring the options, because as with anything, we have to explore the options and understand what all the parameters are. But it's very helpful to hear. We would be putting a basement. We would be utilizing that, and then the corridor space. So we would also say that currently corridors are very closed off. We would have obscured glass. There would be a lot of shared light, and as is the case for either the double or single loaded corridors, would always have glazing to allow light through. So in either option, you would have barred light. And but I agree. It's the user's comfort is very key.
And to the point of natural light, we hear you. I think that is a concern, because we're taking a space and making it a bit deeper with offices. For scale, we talked about if we did run that corridor, it would probably align from the edge of the wall to this column in the room here. And then the rest of this would be an office space from that column here. So you can kind of start to gauge the depth of space, and our intention would not be to line this exterior wall with offices to block the natural light. Our goal would to bring as much natural light from that exterior wall as deep as we can get it in this space. So there will be light studies if we decide to proceed with this option. Our intention is not to make anybody work in the dark, but we do appreciate the point, and it's something that we're definitely looking into.
Laura, I can share something on parking. I just want to give you a little more context on parking. So our Inspectional Services Department is in the GAR Hall down on Dane Street, and our Health Department's in the Senior Center. Now, they have more employees than the number I'm about to give you, but we do have about 10 vehicles in their vehicle fleet, or will have. for inspectors. So we have on the inspectional services side, we have electrical, plumbing, and building inspectors. And on the health side, we have sanitarians and a couple other, they inspect restaurants, they inspect summer camps and swimming pools and the beaches and all that. So, so right now, 3, 6, about 9 vehicles. So call it 10, and understand that we're no longer buying internal combustion engine vehicles. We're buying electric vehicles. Certainly for all our light duty vehicles, for any type of sedan or small SUV. Some of our larger vehicles, you can't buy them as electric yet. But the point being, we'll have a vehicle fleet coming over from those 2 departments when we finish this project. And it's a fleet that's not going home at night with these employees. So it'll need to be parked overnight. So we're likely to be looking to parking off-site. We're likely to be looking to one of our municipal lots for those fleet vehicles to charge overnight. And so just, know that. But at the same time, there will be a dozen or so employees from those 2 departments coming back home, coming back to City Hall. And as one of the folks here said earlier, people coming to do business with those departments who aren't necessarily coming to City Hall today. So it'll be more people looking. And at the same time, we can't offer parking for everybody in our lot, right? So there's parking, there's on-street parking, there are lots where we are exploring all the time other places to access parking. City of Portsmouth, New Hampshire does a great job on Friday and Saturday nights of having a kind of a mix of municipal parking and private parking that's made available during those times for other uses. So we're looking at all of that, not just for City Hall, but also for all of our downtown. So, and thank you for getting up and saying you don't want to lose green space, because we don't either. That pocket park is the next green space to that park is the Common or Independence Park and the beaches. So I think it's really important. And but these folks have to show us the different opportunities, the different options, because we also don't want to lose parking. So that's what we're looking at.
It's a little bit of a catch-22.
John?
Could you talk a little bit about, so all those employees move to this new City Hall. What happens at the Council of Aging? What happens at the GAR Hall?
The GAR?
The GAR Hall.
The Grand Army of the Republic is GAR. It goes back to after the Civil War, I'm pretty sure. So the Council on Aging needs the space, and they will easily move into and program the space that the health department is in now and has been in, really for some time. So, everybody's doing fine, but they will be able to take full advantage of that space. And remember, even though you're a lot younger than me, we're getting there. And if you think about the baby boomers, I'm a baby boomer as well, kind of tail end of that generation, but it's kind of a pyramid with the largest generation has been in the workforce and is moving into the retirement over the next, X many years. And so the Council on Aging is going to have an ever-increasing constituency and need and demand for services and programming. As far as the GAR Hall, we had to put inspectional services in there. I think it was when we tore down Memorial to start the middle school project. And the Ward 2 Civic Association and other neighbors in the downtown can tell you there's demand to use that space for other things, as a meeting space and for other purposes. So again, there's no shortage of people who will look to that space to take advantage of it when we do bring inspectional services back.
Mayor, while you're there, I wonder what the staff meetings that preceded this, were there, I'm sure that each department had specific requirements that they would like or have to have. Were there some general comments that you heard from the staff?
So I'll let this team speak to that as well. The question, just because I know Kim's trying to keep BevCam moving, the question is, we have had our staff from all the various departments heavily involved in the conversation. What are some of their expressed needs and concerns and desires for City Hall? So early on, this team met with every department to go through the process of, how are you living now at work, and how is it going, and what do you need, what's optimal, what do you absolutely minimally need, and then what's optimal. So they went through that process. That helped inform a lot of the basic square footages and shared space and set aside space. And then we also, a couple weeks ago on a Thursday, these folks were in for 3 hours, and we had staff come in shifts and hear this presentation and give a lot of feedback. Probably you folks are better qualified to answer the question, since you've been in both of those rounds of conversation with our staff. But a lot of the things you're bringing up were brought up in this setting when they were in a couple weeks ago. But why don't you talk a little bit about what they expressed early on as among their needs?
I think that numbers of the things we've talked about, modern workspace, the safe, secure space, having 2 means of exit from their office space, again, just security, feeling, light, access, and then some very basic things like being able to turn the microwave on and not having to turn their computer off. If the asks were not grandiose in any means, it was a pleasure to working with the groups. I know we really enjoyed all of our time speaking to everyone. Adequate facilities, separation of staff and public facilities, which allows us to having after hours facilities. There's, hearing about more meeting spaces. We know that, the city council chambers, meeting rooms have been, used at different times, and you used to have 2. So, having those spaces back. Flexibility of space, having more spaces that can be used for meeting with constituents. So maybe not meeting in their office. So having a public space that they could meet with folks.
Yeah. I think the long and short of it is we really did meet with everybody, and we took notes on everything everybody said, and there were things we heard multiple times and things that were brought up for the first time with every group that we met with. I think, and you might have mentioned it already, but a break area, the one in the basement, is not cutting it as as I mentioned. So that's something that we're trying to implement into each of these options as well.
Understanding the storage, getting a handle on it, long-term, short-term, what can go away, what can be recycled, understanding the catacombs of things stored in the basement that may or may not need to be there. So that was very much a very big part.
And the technology, digitization, reduction of storage, going to compact, and as folks have said, it's like when you move, this is your one chance to clear out your, as it were, attic, because it's the one time that when you're thinking about relocating, you have the ability to now rethink the things that have sort of been accumulating over, as you well know, many, many years. But I think it was a really great discussion. Everyone was very open, and everyone felt they wanted to work together. I think that was very apparent. Each department was not trying to take more than they thought they really needed. So.
And adjacencies, knowing, having some common spaces. It's not, you saw from our original diagram, we're not adding a large amount of square footage. A lot of that is the fact that we have people in closets now, they should have better space. But some of the pullbacks is that there's copiers in the hallways, but we could create a contained area of a copy room per floor, and that would save space. Not everyone has to have a microwave in their area. We can have a contained area that would reduce square footage as well. So there's efficiencies to be had, and then that would just make spaces better as well. No one wants to smell the copier. It should be in a well-ventilated, proper space. So. And lighting, we heard a lot about inadequate lighting in the building.
Just a quick question. Did you get any pushback or feedback about external vistas and biophilic design? I mean, you have a little bit of the park view. You want to obviously maintain that, helps employee morale, et cetera, et cetera. So I would certainly keep that. Many of those sure that employees here would appreciate that greatly.
Yeah, so we didn't have very many asks for views. We had asked for access to natural light because, as I said, there are folks in fully internal spaces, which is just not, is not optimal. So having access to natural light is.
Would the design number 3, would it, or any of the designs, would it increase the electric service? Because if people, I didn't realize people had to turn off microwaves and turn off computers. That's crazy.
All designs would have full new mechanical, electrical, plumbing scenarios. All designs, yes. Yeah, that would be a consistent, all new IT, all new security, all new, it would be all new infrastructure in any of those. The plumbing is not adequate to the building. It's not an adequate plumbing service. The electrical is not adequate service. IT is, everyone has done their best. The building functions really well for how old numbers of these systems are, but it's not a modern, building, and to move that forward, if you're going to go forward with a project of this magnitude, running all new systems will get you that longevity for the future and be able to have a flexible, usable space for the future.
I would say one other thing. Technology is another big issue, as we've been seeing from the hybrid scenario since COVID. The ability to do many things offline and to go online for getting processing is only going to increase. So that is also going to go to efficiency. We may not need spaces that currently are existing here because of the way technology is already really transforming, and in some ways it's been accelerating for the past several years, as many of you already know. And there could be the ability to say, well, we don't need that space because we're able to handle this through technological means. So we're always looking for efficiencies as well, where we can save and not have to duplicate areas and space unnecessarily. Any other questions?
We appreciate everyone's time and comments. It's always really helpful for us. And I'm sure if you have further comments, there's a means to reach out to. Tony, I don't know if there's a way for reaching out.
Thank you. Yes, just any normal process that you would reach out through the mayor's office, his chief of staff. Send in your questions through Martha, the mayor's administrator, and the chief of staff, and they'll get us your comments. If there's anything else, we will be working with the mayor's office to get some of these drawings posted, setting up a website where some of this information can be online accessible for folks, and that should be happening over the next couple weeks. We probably won't be making a formal decision on option 1A, 2B, 3B, hybrid mix of any of these options in the next couple weeks. So it will all be up and available for you before decisions are made and before we move too much more forward. So thank you all for coming.